welcome everyone. This is the second webinar this school year in a series on educational webinars. This one is on what's your student's post-high school plan. That's the professional title. I've been calling it How to Avoid the Couch for a month. So we wanted to come together and just have a conversation about transition planning and what that means and when that starts and how to help you and your student be as successful as that as possible. So without further ado, I am Lisa Skiffin. I am a disability advocate here at Achieva. I've been with Achieva for a little over 5 years now. I work for the ARC of Greater Pittsburgh and the Achieva family of organizations. I am also the parent of a child with a disability. So while I'm doing this professionally, also with a middle schooler, it's important that I be here as a parent too, because I want to make sure that I'm prepared as much as possible for his upcoming transition out of school and into adulthood. Welcome to Achieva Advocacy and Family Supports. Like I said, the ARC of Greater Pittsburgh and the ARC Erie County are members of the Achieva family of organizations. Who we are, we offer free technical assistance and individual advocacy to families and people with disabilities. We engage in systemic advocacy issues, develop policy on disability and healthcare issues, and then we also have resources such as our resource library. I will send out these slides as well in my follow-up email, and at the end of it, there is a link to our website and also our contact information if you want to reach out to Achieva Advocacy. Mm-hmm. This is just the Achieva family of organizations. We are growing. When I started at Achieva, we did not have Autism Connection and the ARC of Erie County under the umbrella, so that is super exciting. This is our geographic reach. Parts of Achieva support people across the Commonwealth for Achieva Advocacy specifically, and the ARC of Greater Pittsburgh, Erie, Beaver, Allegheny, and Westmoreland counties. Mission and vision, Achieva advocates with, that just changed to, it used to say advocates for, and I love the small word, big meaning. Achieva advocates with, empowers and supports people with disabilities and their families throughout their lives. And we envision a community where all people with disabilities lead lives of personal significance. Core values, respect, passion, ethics, change, and team. And then here's the contact information at the end of the slides. Like I said, you don't have to write that down or anything. I will email that out when I send out the follow-up email to everyone. So that is just a brief introduction. We can always talk after the meeting or, another time next week or in the coming days if you have specific questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Mary Hartley of the Peel Center and Lisa Silverman Esquire to our meeting this evening, our webinar. They are our co-presenters. I've been looking forward to this presentation ever since we started talking about it a couple of months ago. So I really do appreciate you both being here, your time, and everything that you're going to share with us. Mary, I know a little bit about your story, but Lisa, I don't know much about yours, so I'm looking forward to hearing more and more this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll real quick. Mary, you have control. Whenever you're ready to pull up your slides, you're welcome to do that.
And as Melissa said, this is entirely casual. This is your evening. Lisa and I are open to interrupting with questions, probably not talk over each other, but I can't see any of because I'm running the slides, I won't be able to see your hands up or your comments. So they will monitor the chat and stop me if they need to. But we're really happy to be here. And again, my name's Mary Hartley. I'm a parent. I have a 23-year-old young man on the autism spectrum. And I have another child who had a 504 plan in school, who's now in college. And I'm also the executive director of the Peel Center. Achieva is an amazing resource for support. The Peel Center does something similar across the entire state. We do individual assistance, we do training, and we give out information. And we're funded by the Office of Special Education Programs to empower families to ensure that they know their rights and can advocate for themselves. We don't typically go to IEP meetings like Achieva does, but we're another resource, and we have a lot of trainings. I just want to say one of the trainings we do is on writing your IEP goals for transition. And it's very specific. So if that's something you might be interested in, especially, and some other programs, we're happy to help you. But I know Achieva can do a lot of that work as well. And then Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Silverman. I am a parent. I have 3 children, and my middle son has Down syndrome. And so that is primarily the student that I will be talking about tonight, because he did have a transition plan. He's now 24, and we're moving along. So I can talk about that later. But I also have 2 other children, and both of whom had 504 plans for one with a congenital vision defect, and the other one had some physical limitations. So I'm very well versed in getting what you need from the school system. And I couldn't agree more with Melissa and Mary that having many partners in addition to family members tonight makes sense. It's truly it truly is a partnership. And I also have been involved with Achieva for 22 years. I've either been on the ARCA Greater Pittsburgh board, I rotated off of there, and I was on the Achieva board of trustees, and now I'm back on the ARCA Greater Pittsburgh board. And I can't speak more highly of the organization. And I've also used a lot of the services that the ARCA Greater Pittsburgh offers. Throughout our journey, and I highly recommend connecting with them whenever you have questions, because they're there to support, and it's easy to get access. So without that, we'll move on.
So we just want to suggest you can certainly ask questions in a broad way, but if you have very personal questions about your young adult family member, especially, we would appreciate you waiting till the end for those questions after we turn off the recording, just because this will be recorded and it'll be in the public sphere for a long time. Tonight, Lisa and I will be talking about our children very differently, mentioning names or talking about some specifics. If we have gotten that if we're doing that, we have buy-in from our kids to do that. So that's how we decided to operate tonight. So Lisa, you want to start talking about this?
Yes, absolutely. So the very first slide, I think, is I guess my overarching view of transition is there's no right and wrong way to do it. There's a lot of support. There are a lot of tools to build into your IEP. But really, at the end of the day, if it works for your loved one and for your family, then it was effective transition planning. And if you get at times stymied by the rules, because there are a lot of them that deal with IEPs, at least that's the way I felt. And I'm an attorney by trade, but I felt overwhelmed every time I was asked, what do you think that your son wants to do? And this would be in middle school years. I would sit back and say, like, I don't know, and it's a very overwhelming process when you're sitting on our side of the table, because you love this person unconditionally and you want them to be successful. And you do have a whole team across from you that really wants to see them be successful. But the hard part is doing the dance around the language and the rules. And that's where I always got stymied. So I think that's my overarching view, is that if it works for your family, it's going to be successful. So as you hear us tell our stories are based on what worked for us. It doesn't mean it's going to work for you, but we can certainly maybe give you an idea that'll spark something in your family. So the first thing that I would say is, Mary, do you want to switch the slides? We're on, should we proceed or just do generically?
Yeah, I think so can you see this? Can you see the slides changing? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
it's still on the first one for some
reason. So I wasn't sure where you wanted me to head. That's why I
no. I've been changing them. Hold on a second.
No, it's not working. I can move on. I can move on to the letting go. No. So ultimately, the one thing that I always said when I would have discussions in my IEPs where we agreed to disagree, and we really did have a team approach. But frequently my response would be, I am the CEO of my son because I know him better than anyone. I know his likes, his dislikes, his sensory needs, what works for him for learning, what type of repetition, what things he doesn't like in learning. He doesn't like to be talked to a lot. So those types of things were always within my bailiwick, and that started early. That started early on in school, and my team worked together. So I would say from second grade on, our team was always looking for ways to build independence into his day. And he needed a lot of support to be included in regular education, but we were able to figure that out with a team that talked to each other constantly. I wasn't always involved, but they always knew what our vision was for him. And our vision was for him to be included as much as possible in the regular ed classes in a meaningful way. And I know that's a lot of jargon, but it really does happen when you get a team that sits down and says, okay, we're going to do a lesson in physics in 5th grade. We want him to be included, but boy, the math is way above his level. But then the kids had buy-in, and they would have racetracks where they were doing all the timed measurements of the cars going down the racetracks. And that was their introduction to physics. And my son got to manage the stopwatch or the cars. And so he was engaged and he was part of a team, and that built his social capital with other students. And so it just proceeded from there. So that would be something, when I say it starts early, it really does start early, and it's talking with your team about what your expectations are for inclusion. It's not that I expected that he could keep up academically, because I knew he couldn't, but it was figuring out a way for him to be part of the classroom and learn in his own way.
Great. Can you tell me if the slides are showing now?
They are.
Okay,
they are. We're on
good.
slide number 3.
Great. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about expectations, planning, and practice, and then Lisa will really chime in here. This is a process, and I can't say this enough. Prior to coming to the Peel Center, I worked on a project at the United Way called 21 and Able for 5 years. And all I did was transition work. So I started that effort when my son was 13. So I consider I'm pretty much an expert in transition. It doesn't matter. It didn't go perfectly. And I just have to say that it's a process. So I think the most important thing for my money is that as you're going through this process, and many of you probably have experienced this, I can't see your faces right now, but you're going to have expectations, you're going to do a lot of planning, and you're going to practice these ideas. And then things will or won't work, and that's okay. Basically, you're just going to do this in a series of processes over and over and over again. My son is 23. We are doing planning and practice again. We're doing this whole series of ideas again. And so it's like forgiveness, because how many people change their minds? How many careers did I have in a lifetime? A lot, right? So it's not going to be a perfect situation for most people where they're just going to graduate to exactly what it is they're going to do. So I think most important thing is to just sort of give up on the sort of perfect model. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, so I would agree with all of that. We tried things and they didn't work, or they weren't what I thought he was saying he wanted, wasn't necessarily what he wanted. And in my son's case, he does communicate verbally, not always clearly, and it's not always apparent that he's saying something in response to a specific item. So you have to kind of read the room. And sometimes we didn't read the room properly. And then we would adjust, and then we would try something new. We tried a couple of post-secondary transition options before we landed on one that worked for him. And he chose it. We gave him choices and said, do you want this one or this one? And he made the choice. And I think ultimately it was the right choice for him, because early on, he thought he wanted one thing, and then he figured out that he didn't. He needed more, and he needed more intensive instruction. And I think he ultimately understood that, and we moved him to a different program. So I would just say, as Mary says, it's patience and it's trial and error.
And I think just to sort of put this in perspective, a lot of students will meet their goals. I think of this as like a very long runway. So for instance, with my son, Jack, we started things like laundry when he was about 9 years old. We just sort of started the process of doing your own laundry. And instead of starting at, 18, when I did in college, and I went to the laundromat for the first time and made pink socks, right? He had the opportunity to kind of learn in stages about how to do his laundry. Not always perfectly, but in stages. And so over time, he was able to take his own laundry downstairs, do his laundry, and bring it up. It doesn't mean that it's perfectly folded and put in the drawers. It's not, but it's in the right drawers. And he can find his clothes, his clean clothes, and understands the difference. And so for us, it's a process that might take a little bit longer. Lisa?
Well, I'm just going to say, Mary, I'm very impressed that you started that, because I always say my children led a charmed life, because if it was easier and faster for me to get it done when I was busy with my job, my husband's job, and 3 kids, we would sometimes just do things. And we learned as we went through the independent living parts of transition, now that I have a 24-year-old, that maybe that wasn't the best approach for him. It's every family is different. And I think Mary's giving us good advice that you have to think about what's going to have a long runway for your student, because some of the things I didn't think about and I've been working on very consistently now that we're done with the school system and have more time. So, when you get to age 14 in your IEP, you will see new goals appear. And they will say employment, post-secondary education, and community or independent living as appropriate for your student. And the one thing to focus on is that it should be an assessment of where they are at that point. So it'll be items that are in line with someone who's 14 or 15, and what's available to them and what makes sense for them as far as their ability and their emotional capacity ready to move forward. So that's something to think about. We're going to talk about goals in a minute, but you are able to have goals for training and education, employment, and independent living skills. And then the programs or the services are the course of study, and they can be functional skill development and they can be academic development. So there's going to be a lot of different things that can go into those subparts under a goal. But the main thing that I would say is have a goal. Make sure that you choose a goal in each area. It will change. You're not going to have the same goal from age 14 to age 22. But your goal should be that, my loved one will work in a local restaurant upon graduation from high school with support if needed, and fading as needed. It'll be specific. It'll say when it will happen, and then you'll work towards that, correct? So you want to build the skills to give them the opportunity to try working in multiple different aspects of the restaurant industry, whether it's working in the front of house, cleaning tables, stocking, or it's behind the counter, or it's working in the kitchen. You then figure out what they like and don't like about that, but you've set a goal that then your team knows what kind of sub goals they put in and what kind of program you build to hopefully get you there. So you'll look at all the various options that fall under that. But that's when we say the IEP is used to support getting to adulthood. It's thinking about the end goal and backing to it. So it just depends on what that goal is. For post-secondary education, my goal and my son's goal originally was he was going to go to one of the college programs. But through some blips that happened to him in high school and other things, we changed that goal, and he ended up in a different type of program, but it was the right program for him at the time he was 19. So, we changed our goal, but our team worked with us as these things developed. So I think that's ultimately my message, is to make sure that you pick something on each area and then you just figure out how you're going to start, and then you just tweak it as you move along.
And just another piece about that is the measurability of it. You know, I think it's just like your regular educational goals. Sometimes it's really good to have a measure so that you can actually see what kind of progress is being made and then use that as a tool to advance to the next goal. We always like to say the transition to adulthood, the last day of school should be like the first day of life. And Lisa and I talked about this, you know, it's not necessarily going to work out that way. Like the services might not be in place in time. It just doesn't always come together in that way. But it could be that your son or daughter has a job, for instance, maybe they work a certain number of hours a week while they're still in high school, in that last year of school, last couple years of school even. And when they graduate, they have that same job. Mm-hmm. So it's not just a practice job or a pretend job, it's a real job. And that will help smooth that transition. So you want to really think as much as possible to try to coordinate those things so that your son or daughter really feels like, you know, hey, I'm moving on to my adult life, or I'm moving on to my post-secondary education training or program, or my activities in the community. So there's some kind of dovetailing. It doesn't feel like so abrupt, right? That next summer becomes life. Thanks.
And it works better for you as a family if the planning works, because you won't have what do they call it? Going to the couch or falling off the cliff when the bus stops coming. But if you're like my family, my son qualified for ODP waiver, and there is a natural gap in when the school system ends and when the funding comes through. But if you plan for that and you use services through other entities during that time, you don't have your loved one sitting on the couch. It's not necessarily seamless going to the next step, but you've filled the gap. So I think that's something to just think about as you move forward and you look at what's available to your child or student, and then you maximize it to make sure you don't have that gap.
And I was just going to fill in there. So the ODP is the Office of Developmental Programs, and there are different kinds of waivers available in the state of Pennsylvania. I know that Melissa's team and the folks at Achieve Advocacy can help you with this, but there are different types of waivers. ODP are the waivers that support people with intellectual disability and autism. So those waivers, we can go into great detail. That's a whole nother webinar. But Melissa, we will have some information about ODP and waivers at the end.
Yeah, we do have a slide at the very end that has contact information. If you think you need help, they'll tell you on the slides. So
thank you. Yeah, even if you put in Pennsylvania waivers, you'll see all the different waivers in the state. Okay, next slide. I guess we just really wanted to touch on the fact that Pennsylvania, while not perfect, is sort of ahead of the curve of other states. So there was a lot of work that has been done over the past several years between the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, which is really on the labor and industry side, not to complicate things, and the Department of Education and the waiver programs, but mostly ODP or the waiver system, Department of Human Services and Education. And there's actually a memorandum of understanding about how resources are allocated and used. There's also federal language around the importance of those two programs coming together. They're actually, you may not know this, but the Department of Education is actually under something called OSERS, and also VR, vocational rehabilitation, is under the same program. So it's really the same umbrella. And they're really trying to marry these two things, because what's the point of education? The ultimate goal of education is most kids go on to an adult job, right? Have an adult employment experience. Not all people, but that should be the outcome of most people. And people with disabilities are no different. We don't want to infantilize kids with disabilities, we want them to grow up and be adults and have those experiences. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the idea is that you're building these skills so that when they graduate, they can have a job and have meaningful experiences during the day that they choose. So, so really there should be no excuse for your young adult to start having real community experiences in employment. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But if you have any advocacy questions about that, again, we do know that not only, Achieva and Peel can both answer those questions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think we covered a lot of this already. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, so that you're really sort of, again, you're on this runway, right? So you're kind of starting with something that's a process. Like maybe they are job shadowing or looking at going into businesses and seeing how they operate with someone. And then they're going to do an internship and a part-time job. So you're kind of building capacity, but you might also be starting even with a volunteer activity. I like to stay, like in our family, our whole family would go and dig the tree pits for the neighborhood when they would put the trees in every year. And then after a while, our son would eventually be able to go with someone, and then someone would fade, and he could do that during the day. So building that idea, building the ability for your son or daughter to do those things, and the support structure so that they can ultimately have a job really takes time. Should be starting super young. And that's chores. Two of the biggest outcomes for students that graduate with a job who have disabilities is regular chores, not just intermittent chores. I have to do this every Thursday. I have to do this every Wednesday. I have to do this every Tuesday, whatever it is, right? And paid work experiences before they leave high school. Those are the biggest reasons why students actually end up in a real job. Lisa?
I would agree with that. So we're moving to the next slide.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I think we talked about goals and measurable goals. I think you want to make sure that you're not just saying you will do something. It should, to be measurable, it should say when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, and where it's going to happen. And that's a pretty easy way to think about it. So if you say you're going to identify 3 careers using an interest inventory, it really doesn't tell you what's going to happen, correct? So you need to have other opportunities to trial experiences. So I think the next slide shows specific goals, and I can probably explain it better. So I don't know if you want, so if you look at the first goal that talks about during school, it tells you while the student is in school, they'll work 12 hours a week in a culinary position at a local restaurant. It tells you where, and they will be provided initial support through job coaching. It tells you how they're going to do it, and then fading and follow along as needed. So they will be employed or not, depending on how that works out. And then you can tweak that goal. But it's very specific because it's participation in employment that's the focus. So it's not saying we will do something or we will refer them. It's saying they will be employed and this is how we're going to do it, or trial employment. And so that to me is something it took me a long time to understand, because my IEP was not pretty, and it had a lot of the CAD language in it. Student will be referred to OVR, student will do an interest inventory. But ultimately, what I learned through my process is sometimes the language didn't matter as long as it was happening. Does that make sense? So teachers maybe weren't great at writing the goals, but they were good at implementing them when we talked about what he would be doing. So sometimes I gave up the language because I was still getting what I needed. I would have preferred, as a lawyer and someone who's been around Achieva a long time, to have a really pretty IEP. I didn't always have a pretty IEP, but I got what I needed because I knew how to ask for it. Even if it wasn't written this way, we tried experiences. And that is, I think, the most important part. But in order to hold folks accountable and making sure that everybody on the team knows, it's better to have that first example rather than that generic example that says the student will be referred to OVR. You want to know specifics. So I think the second one is given job coaching in a community-based work experience. That's something that can happen even earlier, sometimes through OVR and their early reach program and their pre-employment transition services. Mary, is that still the term of art? So
yes.
So you can have opportunities to trial work experiences through OVR while you're in high school, and they will be paid experiences through the pre-employment transition services. But that's how I view the second one, given job coaching and a community-based work experience in a retail setting. You're saying exactly what the student will learn, and that they'll do this in a certain percentage of the time measured by the on-site job coach. That tells you, and it's a measure of whether they're succeeding. It also lets the team gauge whether the activity you have them engaged in is A, of interest of them, B, within their skill set, or C, requires more support. So the reason those goals are good is because they give everybody good information to then evaluate what the next steps are. So that is why we put examples in, because I'm a big example person. You can talk about goals, but if I don't see something that makes sense to me, it never gelled in my mind, which is probably why I didn't have a pretty IEP for a lot of years. So it took me a while to get good at it.
And another piece is that if you actually have some measurement time intervals in here, like in this case, it's a week, you can maybe get to the issue earlier about if it isn't happening, right? Does that student need a different accommodation? Do they need a different, maybe they need a visual schedule on the wall where they're working. Maybe they need, other kinds of supports, a timer or whatever, right? That you want to make sure you're identifying why they can't achieve that, because it potentially could be that they just need a different model. So it's important to have data, but also to look at the data. You'll see a lot of goals in IEPs, but they don't take measurement enough that you would even get to that process. You get to your meeting a year later and you're going to find out that's too late.
Right. And that's the other point, if I can dive in. I know a lot of times people talk about their annual IEP. Well, the annual IEP is an annual IEP because the law says you have to have an IEP at least once a year. But as the parent, and as I say, as the CEO of your child, student, adult, soon to be adult, you get to call an IEP meeting at any time for any reason. So for instance, if you're trying a work experience and you're hearing about behaviors, which is how my son would say, I didn't like something, he would engage in silly behaviors. So when I would hear those things, I needed to know what it was in response to, or was it too hard or too difficult, the task we had put him in. For instance, one of his work-based learning experiences, and now they have a different term of art, I guess they're community-based work experiences through OVR. One of them, when he was in high school, was at Barnes & Noble shelving books. Well, our team felt like that was going to be an appropriate setting because he had been doing mail runs and other things that showed that he had in working at school where he was alphabetizing and doing it well. But when he got to the Barnes & Noble job, he was having to go to 3 or 4 letters under BREA. It was too taxing for him. And what we found when we drilled down and we met with the job coach was that when we got past the first 2 letters, he was peace out. So that wasn't a good fit for him. And that's how we learned that, and we moved on. But that's an example of why you want to have a meeting and you want to call it sooner rather than later.
Great. Next slide. I'm going to move really quickly through this just to say, the more your son or daughter, or your child, I should say, is included earlier on and later, the more included they'll be in adult life. There's all kinds of data about this, that the outcomes are better the more they're included. So even, to be quite frank, even if your son or daughter is not included in school in a very significant way, finding opportunities in the community where they can be included is critical to these kind of positive outcomes. And we have all kinds of data on inclusion and how people who become adults are able to live more independently, even interdependently, but they can ask for more of what they need, and they can certainly advocate for themselves. Next slide. This is what I want to say. More than anything else in the world, don't wait for the school. Just don't wait for the school. You just move ahead and you do these things with or without them, because the timing is just never going to be perfect. I say sign up in your OVR district office. And in the Pittsburgh region, in the Erie region, we have our own satellites, but every district, every community has an OVR office or vocational rehabilitation office. And you can actually sign up for them to go through the real adult process earlier than just doing the pre-employment transition services. So for instance, my son, I think we signed him up at 16, maybe 15. At 17, somebody came in and finally talked to him about a potential real job. Now, he stayed in school till 21, but we started that process. It takes a really long time to get them to come and start that all the systems that have to be in place. I know there's a lot of work that goes with the evaluation process, et cetera. So you just really want to be prepared. You also want to tell your school that you want them to come to OVR, to come to one of your IEP meetings about transition and any other services that you might be in need of in the community. So my son's case, he does have ODP waiver services that come from our county. So every county has a service office for that waiver. And again, look for volunteer opportunities. We talked about that. I'm just going to put it out there. How many people get a job where they don't know someone? Their first job? Generally, you need to know someone to get a job. So don't be ashamed to reach out to your friends or people you know who have small businesses in your community that you've known for years to say, hey, do you think there's a job here for, my son or daughter? It's a really healthy thing to start doing, networking, having them network and get to know people who might have an opportunity. And if it's not for them, it might be for somebody else. And transportation training. And I'll talk a little bit more about this if we have enough time, but it takes a while to get to this point. Transportation is one of the biggest barriers to employment. Not so much anymore. We do have the internet, so there are some changes, but I think ultimately you really want to get this started pretty early. Thanks. Next slide.
So how do you help your students identify interests? You look for anything that suits your family and your family's interests and your students' interests in your community, in your school community. My son had a great deal of success in his school community, which then translated into community. And as you build the broader community for your loved one, you're also building the community for yourself. I think part of this was we were going to talk about self-care. The self-care that I had was having support. I have many friends who have students with kids with disabilities, but I also have a really rich experience of friends of my son's parents who are my dearest friends and who've been there along the journey with us, and they're there to support me. And I'm in book clubs with them and have a drink of wine with them, or they've been there to listen when I've needed them and needed perspective. So don't forget to build your community as you're building your child's community, because it all comes together. One thing that I would say is when you get to high school, don't assume that rich high school curriculum isn't accessible to your student with intellectual disability if they haven't been fully included up to that point. We found that there were some great classes that were kind of like honors wildlife biology, that we skipped biology, but we got permission to take honors wildlife bio because a lot of it was taking care of animals and plants. So it was skill development for him to apply in the workforce. And so in that respect, we looked creatively with our team to find classes that were going to build skills that fit my son's outcome that were also educational. And he learned a lot about different things, but he got to trial classes. He did a lot of graphic design classes on computers. He did that because it's computer skills. It's learning better skills to use. So now he uses a calendar on the computer, using apps for his employment schedule, which is something he has to do now. And we're still working on perfecting that. But at the end of the day, all of those skills were introduced in classes that I never thought I would put him into until the team sat down and talked to me about different classes. So don't underestimate that, because then you can find what they're good at skills wise. And look at, I feel like you can look in your faith organization, lots of volunteer opportunities there, whether it's, collecting food at Thanksgiving in the back of the church, whether it's, or temple, whatever your faith organization is, looking at their youth groups, seeing what kind of activities the youth groups do, and getting your son or daughter involved in the youth group. There are a lot of opportunities if you just seek them out, and they all build skills. I also felt like having a leg in Best Buddies and the Special Olympics Unified Sports that were brought into our high school during my son's tenure really was helpful, because he built relationships with peers who are living a similar life to him now, who also have disabilities, but they also are still around. The problem that we had is when all of his good friends from his days in the marching band went off to college, he was feeling kind of lonely. And luckily we had all of these other friendships that we were able to rely on when all of his friends were gone. So I always say have a leg in both camps, because it's really helpful as you move through life. And the other thing that we did that I think really helped make him part of community, both broadly and in our school, is we would reach out to friends, and he would attend basketball games. He would attend football games. He would sit in the student section. He became a really valued part of his school community, but he also became very visible in our community. And that matters, because people in our business district know him from seeing him. Our police officers know him from seeing him at the games. And he would go to the school theater programs. So all of those things build friendships. They build social capital in your community. So don't be shy about asking. There's tons of peers who are happy to sit with your student at a game. And that also builds the social skills that you need to translate into jobs and finding interests. So a lot of those things may sound like, oh, that's a no-brainer, but you really have to plan for it and make sure that you're comfortable letting them go and letting them have that independent opportunity, maybe with you in the stands on the other side, but then their peers know there's a safety net, but they're having a real experience in middle school or high school that otherwise they wouldn't. So that's why I raised them. Mary?
Okay, that's it. Let's go to the next slide. We have a lot of information. We want to get through these, so we'll move relatively quickly. And then again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to raise your hand or put questions in the chat. So I think we just briefly want to go over this just to say, and you can look at this on your own, to think about how they are going to spend their time after 12th grade, which there are, besides employment, there are transition programs, sometimes at your school, sometimes not at your school. And it's important to know what those are in your community. And remember, you can go to school until your 22nd birthday now in Pennsylvania under an IEP. So just, that's new information for those of you who hadn't heard it. And there are post-secondary education and training programs. We hear a lot about some very exciting on-campus opportunities for students with intellectual disabilities and autism, especially, or a student with a different disability who might want to go to college or a training program, and you can go in typical training programs too. So you might be able to do that while you're still in high school as sort of a bridge. And then also after high school, of course. And then we talked a little bit about waiver. We won't go into that in great detail. I'm sure there are other opportunities for those trainings, but but making sure that these community-based opportunities, somebody was on earlier who does something called community participation supports, which is, really an opportunity to get out into the community and have different experiences and meet people. And it's important for socialization and learning and education. So everybody's going to need something different, and all of us need different levels of support. I need support. Lisa needs support. We all need support. But if needed, who's going to be at home to kind of monitor and connect all the dots? Because I just know since my son got out of school, he's out in the community doing different things every single day. My husband is now semi-retired. He's kind of monitoring some of that. Jack can be home independently for some of the day, but we really do have to sort of always keep tabs on him. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then how will they travel? So my son did travel training, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But he actually uses the city bus most of the time, or walks most of the time, and sometimes he's driven. Next slide. And so our son's days are very different. Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about how your son...
It was very important to our family that my son find employment. So he works 3 to 4 hour shifts, 4 days a week. He works at a restaurant, and he also works at a bakery. So he does similar jobs at both, although at the bakery now he's training to use the cash register and be behind the counter more. And then we decided that while we were working on employment, because for us there was a gap, that we looked into the Goodwill Aspire program, which is a community participation and training program. And he loves it, and he goes 1 day a week, and it's a day where he is with friends. He does all sorts of things, and they work on skills that still need to be maintained. So it's been a really good fit for him to have a combination of employment and attending a program. He has a very rich social life. As you can see, he's involved in CrossFit, Special Olympics, art class, Friendship Circle, Miracle League. I am his Uber driver, so I am all over the city every day, all day, and I have all sorts of bags packed to support him and me while we do that. And then we still maintain occupational therapy and speech therapy because they help us with skills that support him in employment. They've really been our private team has been a large part of his transition. And then he likes his downtime. He likes to have his time to hang out with his friends, watch movies, do whatever any other 24-year-old would do. So we feel like it took until probably last January. So he had been done with the school system for 9 months for us to build this schedule. But once we figured it out, it's been working very well.
So, and my son, Jack, he graduated during literally in COVID-19 that year. He wanted to get his diploma because he wanted to go to the Bidwell training program to do lab technician work. That program did not work out for him. And we have done a myriad of things since then, but he has always, even in school, while he was still in school, was in the Pittsburgh public schools. He did the on-campus CCAC program and worked with transition coaches. So he had already been taking classes at community college. And so now he's currently auditing some rich classes at CCAC. He spends 2 half days a week at community participation supports. I don't think that's the right fit for him. We've been trying to get a HAB aide, a habilitation aide, for a very long time, who's a good fit. I think we're just going to go a completely different way, and his dad will manage his person-directed supports. These are all things, again, it's like a whole different webinar. Mm-hmm. Or my husband might even become a supports broker himself because he is semi-retired. He works with a transition coach. We're actually at this point paying out of pocket for this person to meet him on campus. We have also gotten that through OVR. But this person is very skilled. And honestly, we're not paying this person a lot because we're not using them a lot, but they're also redoing all of his interest surveys and things that he already sort of did different versions of. and very specifically targeting how we can help him now. He's had lots of stops and starts in this transition, and a lot of it's medical. I mean, it has nothing to do with his inability or interest. You know, he's very interested in working, but he's just had a lot of issues over the years. So we're just really sort of starting again, which is what I talked about earlier. It takes patience. Next slide. I just want to talk a little bit about transportation training, and we want to have some time for you guys to ask questions. So I'm going to make this very brief, just to say that my son still to this day hums, stims, and jumps. It's part of his who he is. It's part of his who he is as an autistic person, and he makes this movement. But he's still, when he was little, we couldn't hold on to him. You know, he had very little impulse control. He'd run into the street. You know, I think a lot of us have experienced that, and we kind of held on to him. So we slowly worked up to him walking a block ahead of us, walking a block behind us. He walked with staff that he would work with, behavioral health staff, walk down the street, learn these skills, learn to walk. We live in a city neighborhood, crossing the big street, crossing the small streets. But then, you know, we had high expectations for him to take the bus. It was really ultimately something we wanted him to be able to do so he could have that independence. And we literally dreamed, my husband dreamed one day that we took the bus with him. He got off the bus, went across the bridge and said, bye, see you later. And that was, you know, when he was probably 6 years old. But he did end up doing transportation training through, actually through schools. That took a very long time to get. So we wrote that in his IEP early. And we didn't just do one goal in each box of the IEP. We did multiple goals. And part of that is timing, just trying to get ahead of it. So fast forward, he literally does take the bus just about everywhere and walks everywhere, uses an app, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But, you know, a lot of kids will drive and get to the point where they're able to drive, or drive at 16, just like anybody else. Employment, this is critical for employment. So again, just reiterating the importance of it. Next slide.
And can I just add one thing for my son? We started in 7th grade. I live in a walking school district, but they started with situational awareness in the building and then out of the building. And that's something you as a family can work on anywhere you go. Talk about what you're seeing. And the other thing that I would add is make sure you're following the rules of the road. I know a lot of us will cross when the little red hand is there. That is not something that travel instructors will tell you to do with someone who's slow, with Down syndrome, with intellectual disability. They need more time. So make sure that you're following the rules, because you'll be their example as you're starting to add these services. Just make sure you think about your behavior and how it impacts what they think is the norm. So that was my only caveat.
Yeah. I think we'll just go through these next slides pretty quickly. This is one that just says there's joy in repetition. There's, again, this long runway, lots of repetition. Next slide. And it's never too late to start. So we said you start at 14, right? That's really when you get started in Pennsylvania. But just because you haven't started yet doesn't mean you can't start right now, today, tomorrow. And more of these independent skills. You know, we talk a lot about letting go. Letting go is really important as a parent. But we can't build skills unless we at least give it a shot. And you really kind of have to let things not go well sometimes in that process. And that's hard for us to let go and to do everything for our kids, because it's easier or faster. But that process it's a lifetime of work. So next slide. And again, we can also do a lot of home. We're going to talk a little bit about, in the next slide, about independence skills that we can work on at home. So Lisa, I'm going to talk about on the left side, just real briefly. Again, we talked about chores, organization and calendar keeping, money skills. Remember, if your child, you know, we hear this all the time, they still have that counting coins thing on their IEP. I hope most teachers have gotten away from that. if your child cannot count coins,
It doesn't matter.
go get them a charge, a little mini, Visa gift card that you can reload. Everybody uses plastic now, or your phone, right? You can wave your phone over the thing. Just get off that goal. Like, forget it. Nobody's counting coins. Responsibilities for school and home. Having an actual responsibility, like you didn't do your responsibility, that really starts to set the mind to be prepared for that. Community commitment, same thing. If you have to be at the church or you have to be at the volunteer activity every week and they expect you at a certain time, that expectation is really healthy to build in. Technology independence and safety, we're going to talk about that in a minute. And this idea of jobs within your own neighborhood. So, what kid doesn't walk dogs or help out with a neighbor's plants when they're away? There are things that you can do right in your community really early before, typical employment age to start getting these skills, but also you can do those later as well. Lisa?
So one thing that I think truly benefited our skills for independence for my son was sending him away to a sleepaway camp. There is so much independence, as we know from my typical children, that they gain from going away and you not controlling their day. You're trusting them to a camp. You, of course, set the stage with anything that's necessary for them to be successful. What are their conditions for success? But find a camp and trust the system and let them go to a camp that works for your family and for them. It makes all of the difference in the world. And they come back a little puffier and a little stronger and ready to do things for themselves at home. The other thing is, don't forget meal preparation and cooking. It's a lifelong skill. Let them help in the kitchen when and where you're baking. We did a lot of baking. Baking was something he likes to do. I don't cook, I bake, which is why he bakes. My husband's the cook. And we're just getting the job done. The other thing is when it says fun activities and independent friendships and relationships, let them plan, be the party house. Invite their team over after a game for an ice cream social and let them plan it. Let them help get the things together. What do we need? They're going to learn the things that they need to learn to go to the grocery store and find the items that are for it. So you can start that early and you can continue it. Have a movie night and make it a standing thing with their friends, because then they become more vested in it and then they're more willing to participate. It doesn't become a chore. It's something that they recognize they're entertaining and they're the one entertaining, not you. So that's just a couple of points. The rest of them are self-explanatory.
Okay, next slide. I'm going to talk just briefly about this because then we're going to run through the rest of the slides and give you some time to talk. I just want to say that idea of dignity of risk, I think a lot of parents have and educators already know about this concept, but just think back to yourself as a teenager. Like when I talk in room, I'll ask people, how many of you made a mistake when you were a teenager? Like seriously, like all of us. And I think sometimes with kids with disabilities, you see this a lot, like with internet, like the kids start finding things on the internet they're not supposed to find, right? It's okay. Kids make mistakes. And I think we have to try to work on those skills. And it's important to allow mistakes to occur so that they can learn. And it's just a really important issue. You don't want them to be victimized and all of that, of course. And I think there's a lot more protection than there used to be for things like that I was describing. But I just want to make sure that people understand my son did not do these things perfectly. And as a matter of fact, there were times when I had to try to chase down the city bus to see how we could get him back on a bus. And by the time I got there, he was already on the bus, going back in the direction he was supposed to be. But as long as you leave that sort of door open so that they can ask for help and they don't feel like they're going to get in trouble or not be able to do it again, you have freedom. You have the opportunity for them to try. So just staying open to the dignity of risk. Thanks. Next slide. And these are just two quotes both of our kids have said. We just thought this was great, you know, and my son is always, Mom, you have to become independent, you know, like let go, get out of here. I'm fine.
And whenever I remind him of things that he needs, he says, I'm a responsible adult, very indignantly. So, you know, it's there, you know, the lessons are there. It's just a matter of whether they can implement them. The desire is there. With respect to technology, I think that's our next slide, Mary.
Yeah, next slide is actually just, you can look at this yourself. Most important is teach advocacy early and often, right? Saying no is actually information. It's actually something that kids should be able to communicate what they do and don't like. And that means getting involved in their IEP as early as possible, and also having the ability to understand what their accommodations are, understand their disability, know what their interests are, and also what supports and accommodations they need. That's all I really wanted to say there. Next slide. This is important, and, you know, kind of emphasized work, because work is really important because it takes up a lot of your time. I mean, at least for me, it does. You know, I work a lot of my life, and that's where a lot of my friends and colleagues come from. But however else you're going to fill up your life, it's okay. You have a vocation, a thing that you have to do for money, and sometimes you have a thing that you love. Hey, I started out as an actress. I'm not going to be a full-time actress. I couldn't make a living as an actress. So I had to work. I had to wait tables first, and then I had to work in research, and, you know, on and on and on. And here I am today. So, you know, you have a job and you have things that you love to do. And you can also use the things that people love to sort of back into the job. So they love airplanes and they want to be a pilot, and they can work at the airport, right? So the opportunities can be there. We don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but this is really something you want to go through when you're thinking about your person-centered plan. Next slide. Now technology. Go ahead,
I think
Lisa.
it's coming. Mine were out of order on my
Yeah,
paper.
that's okay.
So all I can say is the iPhone and technology is a game changer for people with disabilities. So don't overlook, if you're a Android user, I'm not as familiar. I'm an iPhone user, as are my children and my son with Down syndrome. And there are tons of accessibility features, if you learn them on the iPhone, that support independence. The Apple Pay, it's great. You can have your Apple Watch or a Fitbit or whatever, and you can load your Starbucks card, you can load other things, and you can tap and pay, and you don't have to count coins or money. You can, but not many of us do. I know I rarely ever have cash. So think about those things. I know it sounds obvious, but build that into your IEP as well. Opportunities to trial that, whether it's in different places, if they're going on community outings, that they're using the technology that you want your son or daughter to learn. Remember, Google's and iCalendar are great for learning schedules. Have your son or daughter put their own important dates in their calendar. Teach them. Learn about the iPhone features for dictation. There are plenty of them. There are also audible set to read text. You can use your microphone to dictate and play back text before sending. There's ways to have your iPhone read text to you, or read articles to you, or you can scan a letter. And so in my case, my son receives letters from various government agencies. He can scan a letter and it will read it to him. He's a much better oral learner than he is a reader. So he will understand it's something he's going to need help with, but he may not be able to pick up some of those big words on his own unless it's being read to him. Think about medications. There's tons of medication managers out there. If your son or daughter takes medications on a daily basis, find the one that appeals to them, and it'll be a reminder to take their pills. So it's another step towards independence. And Find My iPhone or Life 360 or one of those types of. So when you're doing your independent training, you can know that you can find them if for some reason they take the wrong bus, or they make a misstep and they end up on the wrong street. And the one thing we did early on in our travel training, because my son speaks but not clearly, sometimes when he says the name of a street, I wouldn't understand what it was. So his travel instructor taught him to take a picture of it and send me the picture of the street signs. And that way I knew where he was. or if he was in front of a building. So think about all those things that you can start teaching on your own using the technology that's readily accessible to all of us. So just wanted to pass that along, and we'd love for you to add any that you use effectively into the chat.
Yeah, next slide. So we put some technology resources in here. You can keep going through these. These are all different sources. And so if you want to put your technology ideas in the chat, and then there's a final slide. Lisa actually sent me these links the other day. They're fabulous. Mm-hmm. Take the time and look at these videos. It's a young man, Christopher, whose siblings, I think, set him up in this tiny home, and then also did his Alexa technology. So everything is programmed. It's super cool.
Yeah.
And it's on their property, right? That's something my husband and I have talked about. I also want to say, like, my son will not lose his iPhone. You know how it is? We used to lose our wallets and I'm the same way, right? I want my iPhone. So I have my iPhone. I don't know if you can see this now, but I have one that has a wallet in it. So it has other things in it. So I won't lose everything. I have one wallet. And that's super helpful for my son. You can also now scan all those things too if you need cards, and it can all be in your phone. Next slide. Independent living centers. This is important to know about because they're free. Every county in Pennsylvania has an independent living center associated with it. We put the ones in Western Pennsylvania for you here. Great resources. And that One Transition is one of their efforts. So sometimes they have programs for transition age youth, and they do a lot of peer-to-peer work. Next slide. We have some contacts for individual assistance in transition, Achieva, the Peel Center. We have our local Pittsburgh Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. Again, every region has their own, so you really need to look up yours. In Pennsylvania, you can go to the Pennsylvania OVR website, and it'll give you the link for your community, for your region. Allegheny County Department of Human Services, we talked about this particular waiver for ID and autism audience. Those are by county. So you're going to go to your county to get that information. You might also need to go to Bureau of Autism Services in some cases. So if you look at that waiver page, just put in Pennsylvania waivers. All of them are listed. They explain what the waiver means. There are ones for different disabilities and supports. And you want to register your child as soon as possible if you believe that you're going to need this. We used to say, wait a certain amount of years, don't do it. Just register them. Next slide. And then Peel has some resources. We put the links in here. You can definitely look at those. We're also coming out with, I think it might be on the next slide.
Planning for the future. Yeah.
The PA Planning for the Future checklist. We started here in Western Pennsylvania. It was a statewide app. We've kind of gotten away from that. We're actually redoing the PA Planning for the Future checklist. So you just basically make sure you're kind of covering everything, making sure that you don't leave anything out. That'll be coming out on the Pennsylvania, on our website at Peel, but also on the Pennsylvania patent transition website. And all these links are here in English and Spanish if you have other people who need resources. And we're seeing in the chat some of the different ideas. So Kathleen talked about using Echo Dot Alexa to give her daughter reminders, waking up, getting dressed, go to the door, wait for the bus, get ready to go activities, go to bed, etc. And honestly, these are so great because that sort of parent voice, kids, you stop that. You stop that sort of frustration that happens with young adults. So, and then Sandy asked about why aren't travel training services more readily available through schools or IUs?
I think there's only one trainer in Allegheny County right now. And I don't know about other counties, but I think it's a matter of ability to serve everyone. And then they prioritize people who are towards the end of transition, who need to be taught how to get to their job. And they'll fit you in, but it takes time.
I actually had it done sooner because my son went to a city school that, city kids take the bus to school. And he he doesn't need to take a special education bus necessarily. But we prioritized so that he could make sure. So we did, like I said, we did that pretty early, not when his other peers went to school on the bus. They all went at 15. I think by the time he was 16, and we actually ended up doing it in the summer. Sometimes you can just write that into your ESY plan, which can be super healthy. Any other questions? And I don't know if people can unmute, or if they're really personal, we can stop the recording. But
yep, I'm going to stop the recording right
okay,
now.
Great.
That way everyone is free to talk right as soon as hold on 1 second. I have to stop.
Problem. And you can contact either of us directly. We gave you our email address if you need more information.